Hey guys, this is my 2001 Toyota MR2 that I swapped the 2.5 liter 4-cylinder out of the 2012 Plus Scion TC. Makes 205 horses to the ground, and anyways, I had to pull the transmission out to do some service, and I figured this would be a great opportunity to show you guys how to swap it in and all the parts that I sell that make it easier and how all those go together to do this. And the other thing I'll be covering is also all the electrical wiring. With this video, it'll make a total of 6 videos is what I've got planned out. And hopefully it'll come out in the next couple of weeks, but I'm doing these as I go. This first video is all about getting the drivetrain ready to drop in here, and let's get in the shop and get started on those axles. And now we're in the shop. We've got the axles here we're about to modify, but there's a couple things I wanted to cover before we get into that. First is there will be written documentation to go along with this. I'm writing it at the same time as I'm making these videos. So keep in mind that if you're watching this as I'm making the video series, the documentation might not be complete. But if you're looking at it in the future, of course, that'll all exist. If you have any questions, either because I'm still making the videos or because just the documentation is not clear, the email address is going to be in the description. It's probably going to show up in the video right here, and it's also going to be in the documentation. Either way, reach out to me and I'd be happy to answer any questions you got about the swap. I'll do my best to do that relatively quickly. These are the 3 RAV4 axles that we're going to be putting together to make the 2 axles we need. There's nothing really special about these. The trick is we're going to be counting on the internal parts being the same as they were from the factory. So you want to make sure that you either get factory axles or remanufactured axles. If you get aftermarket new axles, we're not guaranteed that the splines inside will match. You can try, and there's a good chance that it'll work, but I know that these work. I know factory units work, and we're not going to be using this today, but this is something to know. If you do get factory ones, you'll want to get one of these kits for each side. These kits from Toyota are really nice. They include the 2 CV boots you'll need. They include all the boot clamps, which are super nice, and then they include 2 tubes of grease. And this is always annoying. They don't actually document this. There's 2 tubes of grease, and they're actually different grease. One is smaller than the other, and it's counterintuitive. The smaller one actually goes in the bigger one, which is the inner joint, and the larger container goes in the outer joint. But anyways, we're not going to be using those today. So step 1, according to the documentation, we're going to open those up and we're going to label the pieces so that we can take it apart. There's no need to keep track of the part numbers as we get them out of the box because these are pretty distinctive. We're going to label all of these before we split them apart, and specifically we're going to split them all apart right at the inner tulip. What you're going to note is, see, one of these is small and one is large. That's actually 23 spline, that's 24, but it's such a size difference you don't even need to count them. The short shaft that has 24 spline is going to get the tulip labeled A and the shaft labeled B. The long inner gets labeled, put it somewhere where we can do it, gets labeled C, and this one gets labeled D. And then the one with the 23 spline small gets labeled E, and then this one gets labeled F. Next step is to disassemble these inner CV boots. There's nothing too complicated to this, and we're going to delay getting grease out as much as possible here. Oh, you know what? I should probably zoom you guys in so you see what I'm doing here. Let's see. Alright, so there's a couple different types of boots, but these ones are pretty popular. These are the ones that you need these kind of pliers to put back together. We'll cover that in a bit. Anyways, it's just a question of unbending this clip a little bit. Once you work a small screwdriver in there, just kind of slot side to side a little bit, and it just unclips. So, first shaft we need is going to be put together using A and F. So let me just put this out of the way. So A and F. F is this outer, and A is this inner. So we've already taken that clamp off. It's just a question of splitting it apart now. Something to keep in mind is these axles are remanufactured, and even if they weren't, these are matched when they put them together. So the bearing size, even though these are nominally the exact same bearing, you can't just take the bearing from this tulip and put it in here, because they might be a little too tight or a little too loose. So we're actually going to take the race and the bearing and switch it over. So let's see. We're going to start with getting shaft F out. There we go. It's the blue schmoo. I don't like the blue grease. I don't have a good reason for it. I just don't like it. Anyways, so we're going to do that, and there should be a snap ring in here. Actually, hold on, let me get some gloves on. Back with gloves. So we're going to go in, and we're just going to release the snap ring right at the top. Should come off pretty easily. Just watch out, these things do like to fly. And there's a snap ring. Set aside. Now sometimes these bearings just slide off, and sometimes they need just a little bit of convincing. This one looks like it needs a little bit of convincing. Now, I've got a block of brass that I can apply just light taps. Now it's important, at first just light taps. You can go ahead and do on the bearings here, but just light taps on the bearings. Yeah, this one is moving, so we don't need to, if light taps wouldn't work, and we might get to one later here, just use a brass drift, okay, like this, right against that race. Sorry, not the inner race, the inner spline, whatever that part is called, and just tap it on off. But these are just the lightest taps. This will be fine. All right. So, at this point, we've got our shaft that we're looking for. The next thing we need is part A. So we're going to do the exact same thing here and see what we get. Oh, well, this one we got black grease, so I certainly don't want to mix greases, so I will actually take a minute and I'll clean all the blue grease out of there. I'll do that off camera because you guys don't need to be watching that. So again, we're going to find the snap ring and remove it. It's just kind of hidden underneath all this grease. Oh, and in fact, this is one of those low profile snap rings, so this might be a little annoying to take out. We'll see. Actually, came right out. All right, set the snap ring aside and try to take the joint out. Oh, see, this one actually just slid right off. So it's wonderful. So again, keep track of the orientation. That goes in there like that. So in fact, to not forget it, we're just going to drop it right in there. So, right in the correct direction. Alright, let me turn the camera off for a second, clean all the blue schmoo out of there, and we'll continue in a second. We've got part F and part A, and it's simply a question of sliding them together. Now this race is the one that's actually designed to go with A, and you can see I added the grease right in there. So we're just going to put it on. Sometimes, there you go, we're going to have an easy one. Sometimes they slide right on. There we go. And it's just a question of grabbing that clip and installing it. Hold on, I'm gonna get a glove. Alright, I'm back. Yeah, honestly, I should wear gloves more. I hate working with gloves, but I hate having axle grease on CV grease on my hands even more than I hate gloves, so here we are. Oh, actually, something I forgot to mention. And actually, I got it wrong. So, pull the joint off. The joint has to be clocked. You see the see how there's pockets here? Those pockets will align with this, and the bearings have to align with that. So you have to clock the bearings. It's not super precise, but you have to clock the bearing so the bearings line up with the big grooves. And I did not have it lined up, so there we go. Now it's lined up, and of course I got grease all over my gloves again. Lovely. So do that, and grab this clip and just install it. There you go. It's installed. That actually went easier than it normally does. And then it's just a question of sliding this back on. Part A and part F. Join them together, and if you clocked it right, that'll just slide right on over. And we'll set it aside. We'll come back to the actual clips, the boot clips later. For the next shaft, we need C and B. B is the one that we just took the joint off of. So we're going to set that aside, and we're going to take this one apart. And keep in mind, we need the bearing that comes off of D. So, oh, and there's that blue grease again. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to clean that out. I don't want to use that blue grease. And we're back with the blue greases gone. So, assembly is going to be the same idea as the last one, except this time we don't have to get our hands all dirty, which is kind of nice. So that just goes on there, slips on. Sometimes you got to tap them on, sometimes they slip on. It's not a big deal either way. It's just the way the fit is. But it does give you a clearer shot of what's going on. So, camera battery ran out, so you missed installing the snap ring. But anyways, what we need to do now is just pack some grease in here, and I'm gonna save you guys the details here. And we've got the races greased, and these races greased, and then some extra oil, extra grease packed in the bottom there. And it's simply a question of inserting these together now, wiggling a bit, and putting the boot on. Alright. And now, we're done with all the dirty part. And the last step is to install the clips. It's pretty important that these be real tight. And you'll see you can only get them so close with your hands, but there's a bit of a trick. There's a tab right here just to keep everything aligned. If you use normal snap ring pliers and you just do this, you can get them just one more step by hand before using the ear pliers on them, and they'll be extra tight at that point and a lot less likely to leak grease. There you go. We got that one done. And let's get this one done. See, get it. Let's see. Hopefully that's in focus. You see that the big one here is there's two spaces there. And we'll simply use that little trick, and we can get a third. Oh, can we even get a fourth? Oh, there you go. We get 2 steps tighter. Then use these to actually tighten it. Oh, I bent the clamp. All right. Well, let me fix that. Minor finagling. Got that fixed. And apply the final tighten. Squeeze. And that is not going anywhere. All right. And we're done. Actually, one extra step on these guys. I said we were done, but I put the clip on this long one here. I put it the wrong way. Technically, you can put these on either way, but you actually want them so that as the vehicle is rolling forward, this little tab here that's sticking out can't just catch and rip the boot off. So we actually wanted to install this one in the opposite direction because this is the right side axle. So let's get that extra notch there. All right. Not a big deal. And if you forget that, I mean, honestly, I've bought plenty of axles that didn't have that, and they've been fine. This is just me being paranoid. So there you go. Now we're actually done with the axles. So next up, let's move on with the transmission. This transmission is a 6-speed transmission out of a Scion TC. A couple of the 2011s had this, but everything from 2012 through 2016 had this transmission. For the 2011s, as long as you get the 6-speed, it's fine, because the other alternative is a 5-speed. And it also came in the 2010 through 2011 Toyota Camry. Though, if you do get that one, this lever and this lever will be different. They're easy to switch out. They're cheap. You can buy them from the dealer. So if you want the taller gears from the Camry, you can go ahead and do that. And since we're going to be tearing into the transmission anyways, it's really not a whole lot of extra work. Another alternative, if you want the taller gears, but you go for a Scion TC transmission, you can replace 6th gear, which is also relatively easy to do with where we're going to be. The reason we have to open up the transmission is because of this part right here. So on the Scion TC, the reverse lockout is unfortunately implemented at the shift lever inside the cabin, and you can see this is a used part. You can see this is the 3/4 gate, this is the 5/6 gate, this is the 1/2 gate, and you can see the track there going up. That's the reverse gate. Now, if you take a look at this 1/2 gate, if you look at the profile, you'll notice there's no detent there. So you really can't feel where the 1/2 gate is. So I make a part that fixes that. And you can see there's a small detent right there. And when you put this in, now you can actually shift and you can feel the difference between 1/2 as well as reverse. Makes it much nicer to drive. Now, this isn't perfect. There's unfortunately a limit to how much travel is on that detent ball. So that 1/2 detent is a little light. It does take a little bit of getting used to drive, but after you've driven it for a bit, it feels perfectly natural. So let's tear into this thing. Really, this is very well documented. You really should just follow this guide, but this video might also be helpful also. So I'm going to be doing according to this guide that's already written. You can download this right from the page that you buy this cam and the rest of the shift lever at. I'll probably put it in the video description if I don't forget also. First thing we're going to do, that way we don't forget later, is we're going to remove the bolt that's holding the reverse shaft in. And that's going to be over here. And there's a crush gasket behind this that prevents it from leaking out. So you want to make sure that this bolt gets held to go back into this particular location. So you can see there's a little aluminum washer behind this thing. And next we're going to get the shift detents. We've got one here, one here, one here, And this is just, it's going to be a, they're going to be all the same. There's just going to be a spring and a ball behind this thing. To get the balls out, a small magnet can help. You really don't need anything special, even just, I couldn't find my proper magnet, and this will work just fine. So you make sure you get all those balls out. And then you got to get the detents. That you can feel this detent here and the detent here for the gate and the cross gate lever. So this with a 10mm Allen. So you'll see, it may or may not show up on camera. This spring here, which is the one that came out of the cross gate, is much lighter spring than this one. Even if you can't see the difference on video, you can definitely feel it just by pushing on them. So make sure that this one, the light one, goes back in this position, and the heavy one goes back in this position. We'll cover it again when we're putting it back together. Next, right behind this gate selector lever, there's an E-clip. There's a bunch of different ways to take it out, but frankly, I'm just use the cheater way with 2 screwdrivers. And here it is. So that doesn't look like it releases much, but it allows the whole mechanism to go in, and you'll notice it's not shifting anymore. That allows you to pull the whole transmission half off. Next, there's all these case bolts right at the interface for the 2 halves. We're still using that same 12mm. That's what you're going to need for most of this. Just take them all apart. And now that you've got it all apart, we need to split the case. You can use a pry bar or just a big fat wrench. There's a real convenient spot right here to just kind of push, and there it goes. And there's another really convenient spot right here. We need something a little thinner, but just a big flat screwdriver will do. Do the same thing. Just kind of push. And there we go. So once you've got the seal broken, just make sure that this is pushed in all the way, and you just kind of wiggle it and it'll come off, and this will just get set aside. There you go, and set it aside. We're trying to take this shaft here out of the transmission. So we're going to rotate it clockwise as far as it goes, and you might have to lift it a little bit to make sure that it's actually sitting in neutral. And you're going to clockwise and jiggle it. And now I've done this a half dozen times now. You're probably going to have to jiggle quite a bit more to get this thing out, but just know that you don't need to take the rest of this mechanism apart. It actually does just come out. So this cam here is the part we're replacing. So let me turn you off to make some space. We got the transmission out of the way. It's not far because we're not going to be doing this for very long. We just got a bit of shmoo. We got to clean off this shaft. You don't really need to clean it, but it's nice. All right. So now that thing is captured in the middle, so you actually have to remove 2 things to get to it. And there's roll pins holding it in. They're really not that tight. There's number 1. And then number 2. There we go. We're going to take this. Oh, almost put the same cam back on. I'm going to take this guy. line it in the same direction as that. Pre-start our pin. Just makes things a lot easier. Pin out. Now this one, it is going to be slightly sloppier than the previous one. When I designed it, I don't have the exact tolerance numbers that Toyota has, and I want to make sure that it fits on all the shafts. There's almost no torque going through that pin, so the slight sloppiness is not a concern, and there's no slop in the direction of the cam. It's only side-to-side slop, so it's actually not going to affect the shift feel at all. And there it is. The pieces are installed. This one's got a tiny wobble. No big deal. None of the other parts do, but it's perfectly fine. That's expected. Make sure you got the right one on. You should have 2 cam detent lines. And let me bring the transmission back in and bring you back in. And this thing goes back in the pretty much exact opposite way that it came out. So we're just going to put this in. This part here is going to go in the slot in there. And we're just going to kind of gently jiggle it in. Nothing should require force, so there's certainly no need for a hammer here. And there it is. Before we put this thing back together, we're going to pull this magnet out. This is just what holds on to all the debris, and might as well give this transmission the best chance of living by cleaning it out. And now that we've got that clean, it just gets dropped right back in. And we're going to clean off the old RTV residue. While you're busy cleaning the case, you got to make sure there's a preload spacer. You can see it right down here. In this case, it stayed at the bottom of the case. It usually stays at the bottom of the case. Sometimes it actually falls out. Just make sure that it's actually in there. Since we're not changing any of the transmission halves or any of the shafts or anything, we don't have to mess with the preload, but it does have to stay in there. Alright, and then we just seal the case halves. This is just pressurized RTV. I really like these, but you certainly don't have to use this stuff. Alright, and now we put the case halves back together. And again, it just requires just a little bit of jiggling. Now, before you do anything else, it's important, this reverse bolt, you take a look in there and, well, you'll need a flashlight, and you make sure that everything is lined up, that you can put the bolt in. And you can go ahead and put it in now. If things are not aligned, you might have to pull the transmission back apart to get everything to line up. In my case, I can see the hole. It's just not quite perfectly centered. So we're just going to see if we can kind of wedge it over. Alright, usually goes in easier than this, but a little trick if you have as many problems as this one's having. You can sand a small taper into the end of the bolt. Helps it get started. And let's see. Just a real gentle tap with the hammer. And let's see if she gets started. There it is. And then we're going to tighten, actually not tighten, we're just going to get them all the case bolts snug, because we're going to torque them down. And then we're going to grab whatever your favorite torque wrench is. We're going to do 22 foot-pounds on all the bolts. And it's important, the same 22 foot-pounds on the reverse bolt. Next, we've got this E-clip. So you're going to take this and you're just going to kind of wiggle it until it pulls out. You'll expose the hole right there. And just kind of gently tap that into place. There it is. Shaft can't push back in. Next we've got to do all the detents. And let me put this in a better position. Start with these. It's the captured ball bearings. One of them goes in here, in there, and the other one goes right down here. And the documentation's got better pictures of where those go. Now, if you remember right, there's a weak spring and a strong spring. Mine, the strong spring is painted gray and the weak spring is painted green. I don't know if that's going to be the case all over, but just go by strength. The strong one is going to go up in here, and the weaker one is going to go in here. And it's not the end of the world. You can reach these after the car is together. If you can't shift into reverse, that's your problem. And then we've got the 3 other detents. So now these should have more detents. And we're going to start by putting the ball bearings in the hole. Followed by the springs. These springs are all identical, so it doesn't matter which one you put in which hole. And again, these, we're going to put a little RTV on them, just to seal them up. And all you need to do now is just verify that it shifts. And you'll notice you actually have an extra detent here for the 1-2 shift rail that wasn't there before. And now we're done with the transmission. Next, we're going to cover the things that need to happen to the motor. Now you'll notice this motor's already been in the car, so the things are all bolted onto it, so we're going to skip showing bolting all of it on. I'm just going to describe it. The flywheel, pressure plate, and the clutch inside, that needs to go on. These are standard Scion TC items. I'm a big fan of the ceramic, but there's no reason you can't use an organic in there if you want. Then this is the header that I make and sell. Now it's really tight in this area in the MR2 Spyder. This hose here you're not going to put on till later, but I left it on here just to show. There's basically just a wide finger's width through there. It's tight. The thermostat conversion housing you're going to want to put on at this point, just not with the pipe. And it's a good time if your motor's got some miles on it to just replace your thermostat while you're in here. This technically can be serviced in the chassis, but it's really difficult. Then the AC delete bracket. In the future there will be an AC compressor, a reduced width AC compressor that'll fit here. Another alternative is you can use the actual OEM compressor here. But if you put the OEM compressor, you will have to notch out the frame rail on the MR2 Spyder. Something to note about the AC delete kit is it is 4-rib only. Some of these motors have a 4-rib and a 3-rib belt, and some only have a 6-rib. The 4-rib fits in both applications. You simply use the 4 ribs closest to the motor, and that works just fine. Since we're only powering an alternator and a water pump, there's really no need to go to a 6-rib pulley. That's just adding friction and weight. Next, we go over to the throttle body. We unbolt the throttle body. You'll find the gasket underneath there has, do you see that little mesh at the bottom? That mesh is worth just a couple horsepower, so go ahead and pull that off. There's no reason to have it in there. And then finally, we need to put the motor mount on. And then we need to prepare for mating with the transmission. So I took 2 bolts. I just clipped the heads off and I put a notch in the end. That allows me to turn them with a screwdriver in case they get slightly bound. Where I prefer to put them to slip these 2 together is down here. So this is the first one, the first hole. It's actually on the upper oil pan. You're going to screw that in here. And then around here, it's important, you don't want this hole. This is a hole that matches up in the transmission, but this one ends up getting covered and you won't be able to get this bolt out. This one right here does fit nicely, and you can actually get it out. So we're going to slide those in, and let me put this on the ground and slip the transmission together. Last thing to do before they go together is make sure you've got the right number of dowel pins. This combination should have 2. It has 1 here and 1 here. In my case, the pin up here is actually sitting in the transmission, which is fine. It just needs to be on either side, but make sure you don't have it double up since it might be coming from 2 different cars. And then just stab them together. There you go. I actually got lucky on that one. Sometimes you got to pull it back apart and mess with the input shaft, but this time everything just slid into place. Alright, from here I'm going to need to go up so I can start getting some bolts around the bottom before I tighten anything up. Some people might have thought that pin looked like it was too long, but I just want to demonstrate there is just enough room to get that out, and this is a 100mm bolt. So, but if you went down in this hole, which is the one I was not recommending, you'd hit the casing here. So, and now we've got it back up. Remember, you're not trying to make the motor comfortable, you're trying to make yourself comfortable. So, you know, reposition as often as that needs to happen to make yourself comfortable. There's 4 little bolts that go from this side on the bottom. There's another bolt here. There's 2 bolts here, which are the 2 that I started. And then there's 2 more here. Let's see, right there. And then there's this one. This one here needs to get the bracket for the shift kit. And there's a tab right on the bracket, and it simply goes in this hole with the tab going in the hole next to it. And all that gets tightened. that's all bolted together. All right, and one of the last steps we got to do before we're putting this thing in the motor, there's going to be a protrusion here. This needs to be ground down to be flush with this. And continuing right along, we put the brackets to mount the drivetrain to the chassis. These are also brackets that I make and sell. This is the transmission kit. These come with the proper hardware to mount them. Just one last thing to talk about. The stock dipstick, which is what I've got in my hands here, comes out about here, which is impossible to get to. This is not a part that I currently plan on making a part for. It's left as something for you to do. I just took the MR2 Spyder, the 1ZZ dipstick, and I just kind of gently bent it. The 1ZZ dipstick is really nice because it's a cable, so it'll actually flex quite a bit and it'll forgive a lot of sins. Now, the big thing you're going to want to do, take the stock dipstick, make sure it's in all the way, and you're going to want to measure from here all the way to the full line. The lines are actually slightly different dimensions, but the important one is that the full matches where it did. So make sure the dipstick ends up the correct length. And what I did for that, you can actually cut the stock Spyder dipstick right here, and you can re-crimp this and the rubber will just kind of form itself right back around it. I just used standard crimp tools and it worked great to make a custom length dipstick. And I snagged the bracket off of the MR2 Spyder, this little rubber isolated bracket. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. This ends up being reachable from the engine bay and it's not too difficult to put it in. I'm sure some of you will do a better job of it than I did, but there you are. Alright, next video is going to be the electrical work because we need to put the harness on the engine before we put the whole thing in the engine bay. It's not strictly necessary, but it's a whole lot easier if we put it on now. So, next video, electrical. See you guys then. Bye.